She climbed into a stranger's carriage wearing a wedding dress. The stranger had red eyes. She wasn't running from him. She was running toward him. Because the man she was supposed to marry, the man with the lantern, the one pounding on the carriage window right now, he was so much worse. Ravenport only existed at night. No daylight, no birdsong, just cobblestones slick with rain, gas lamps guttering in the wind. A city that had learned to keep its worst secrets beneath silver moonlight. Lord Victor Kane had purchased the Whitmore family's debts 6 months ago. Every cent, every scrap of ledger paper, every humiliating number. And he had named his price. Matilda, 22 years old, what he called, in the polished language of powerful men, a blood tribute. She had a laugh that came out louder than she intended. She pressed wildflowers between the pages of library books. She had never once asked to be sold. But tonight was her wedding night. And Matilda Whitmore had made a decision. What no one inside that cathedral understood, what even Matilda herself did not yet know, was that her blood was not ordinary. It never had been. 3 generations of Whitmore women had carried something dormant inside them, something the old books called a gift, something the fearful called a curse. It had skipped her mother entirely. It had been waiting, quietly, for her. And somewhere beyond those cathedral walls, in a black carriage with no lantern and no markings, something ancient had recognized it. Just before they walked her down the aisle, her mother pressed something into her palm, a handkerchief, old, embroidered with tiny blue forget-me-nots, the same one her grandmother had carried at her own wedding. 60 years ago in a small Ohio town, where people still left the garden gate unlocked and nobody thought twice about it. Her mother didn't offer a speech, no apology, though one was owed. Just her name, barely louder than the rain outside. Matilda. The way you say a name when you have run out of everything else. Matilda looked at her mother's face. The shame folded into the lines around her mouth. The love that had wanted so badly to protect her, but simply, devastatingly, hadn't. 2 things sharing the same face at the same time. She didn't cry. She had decided sometime around noon, staring at the ceiling of the room where they'd dressed her, that she would not give this night her tears. She folded the handkerchief into her bodice, right over her heart, walked calmly to the side door. Nobody stopped her. That was the part she would remember longest. Not the running, the walking. The 6 steps across the vestibule floor while the organ played and the guests rustled in their pews, and nobody, not one single person, turned to check on the bride. She had been invisible her entire life inside that family. She used it one last time. Then she hit the side door and ran. One carriage waited beside the cathedral wall, black as a closed eye. No lantern, no house markings. 2 horses standing perfectly still in the downpour, not shifting, not stamping, not doing anything a real horse does in cold rain. She should have noticed that. She threw herself inside and pulled the door shut. Darkness. Aged sandalwood, rain-soaked leather, and something underneath it all. Faint, metallic. Something her body registered before her mind did. The way you smell smoke before you see the fire. She lifted her head, crimson eyes, still, watching. 3 silver scars slashed across his left cheek, each one perfectly parallel, as though drawn deliberately. A face so composed it did not look like something that needed to breathe. Victor's fist struck the window. His lantern threw his face into sharp, greedy relief. "Matilda, darling, come out. I'll be gentle." The man across from her said nothing. He simply pulled her, wordlessly, entirely, into the cold, steady circle of his arms. Her cut hand pressed against his cloak. One drop of blood soaked into the dark wool. His eyes flared red. Just for a breath. A muscle in his jaw tightened. His throat worked slowly against something she couldn't name, but could feel pressing into the air between them like a coming storm. Then he whispered against her ear, "Shh, it's all right. I'll protect you." 2 taps on the carriage roof. The horses surged forward. No driver's shout, no crack of a whip. Just sudden, silent speed. And Ravenport disappeared into fog so thick it swallowed the cathedral spires whole. Victor's shouts faded to nothing. The man, who had not yet told her his name, who had been sitting in that dark carriage as though he knew exactly which door she would come through, leaned close and said something she would turn over in her mind for many nights to come. "Not anymore. Your moonblood will change everything." She didn't know what moonblood was. She didn't know his name. She didn't know whether she had just been saved, or whether she had run from one cage directly into a far older, far more elegant one. The horses didn't slow. The fog didn't lift. And the man with the crimson eyes watched her with something that lived between relief and guilt, as though he already knew the answer to that question, and wasn't sure she would ever forgive him for it. Stay with us, because the fortress waiting at the end of that dark road holds secrets about Matilda's blood that will change everything she thought she knew about herself. The fortress appeared from the fog the way old memories do, suddenly and all at once. Duskbane Citadel was built from black stone so old it had stopped reflecting light altogether. It simply absorbed it. 4 towers, an iron gate wide enough to drive a church bus through, and surrounding it on every side, a forest so thick with fog that the trees looked like they were standing in low clouds. No neighbors, no porch lights left on. No sound of a television drifting through a screen door, just wind, and the faint smell of night-blooming flowers she couldn't name. Matilda stepped out of the carriage and stood still, because her legs had decided they weren't ready to move yet. The man, she still didn't know what to call him, stepped down beside her. He looked at the blood seeping through the torn fabric she'd pressed against her palm, said nothing for a moment, then spoke one word toward the top of the stone steps. "Seraphina?" A woman appeared, as if conjured, tall, silver-haired, with the precise posture of someone who had spent decades being the most organized person in every room. She took one look at Matilda, soaked dress, cut hand, expression of someone who has been running hard and hasn't fully stopped yet, and said, with the no-nonsense efficiency of a school nurse who has seen everything, "East Wing, herb bath, physician within the hour, and dinner," the man added quietly. "The hall is already set." Seraphina looked at Matilda. The briskness softened, just slightly. "You'll eat." Not a question. He carried Matilda up the stone steps himself. She told him she could walk. "I know," he said, and kept walking. His name, she learned at dinner, was Duskbane, King of Nocturne. He said it the way her late neighbor Harold had once said he was pushing 76, mildly, as though the number were a minor inconvenience. The dining hall was set for 2. Long table, tall candles, rosemary and butter in the air. He didn't touch any of it. He sat across from her with a glass of dark liquid. "Animal blood," he explained when she asked, "infused with a binding herb that managed the thirst." And he watched her eat with the focused attention of someone who had not shared a meal with another person in a very long time. when he knelt beside her chair to rebandage the cut on her palm. His movements were careful, precise. A man handling something he was afraid of damaging. His hands were steady. His breathing, she noticed, was not. He stopped midway through the wrapping, his jaw set hard. He was very close to her wrist. "You have no idea," he said quietly, to the bandage rather than to her, "how much discipline this requires." She kept her voice even. "Is that your way of asking me not to bleed on the furniture?" He looked up. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one, among other things. Then, more seriously, "Love is not possession. It is restraint, so the other person can remain free." She didn't have an answer for that, so she finished her dinner. Later, Serafina found her alone in the East Corridor and spoke in the direct way of women who have been holding a particular truth for years and have finally found the right moment. "My lord has watched over your family's situation for 3 years. He has never forced a soul to remain in this house, not one. He has known a loneliness not unlike your own." She said it plainly, then went back to folding linens, as though she hadn't just rearranged Matilda's entire understanding of the evening. She asked him once, in the second week, why he had not simply introduced himself that night in the carriage, told her who he was, given her the choice openly instead of letting her believe she had stumbled onto a random refuge. He was quiet for a long moment. He set down the book he had been reading, a history of land treaties, which she suspected he had already read 6 times. And he looked out the window at the fog over the forest. "Because," he said finally, "I was afraid you would choose to go back." "To Victor?" "To the familiar," he said. "People often do, even when the familiar is what hurt them." She thought about that for longer than she expected to. She thought about her mother's face in the vestibule, about the handkerchief, about how many times. In the weeks before the wedding, she had told herself it would not be as bad as she feared, because the alternative was thinking about what it meant if it was. "You were probably right," she said quietly. He looked at her then, not with satisfaction, with something sadder than that. "That," he said, "is what I was most afraid of." Matilda walked the moonlit gardens, hedgerows trimmed into unfamiliar shapes, flowers that bloomed only after dark, paths of pale gravel that glowed faintly under the stars. She read in the ancient library, pulling volumes at random from shelves that rose so high they required a rolling ladder. She learned the corridors. She stopped flinching at shadows. "I am no longer a girl sold like a debt payment," she thought one evening, standing at the tall library window with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. "Here, I get to choose." She didn't know yet how much that thought was about to cost her. She found the portrait on a Tuesday. Reaching for a history of Nocturne on the highest shelf, she nudged the rolling ladder sideways, and her elbow caught a small painting mounted beside the bookcase. It fell face up onto the floor. She picked it up and stopped breathing. The girl in the portrait had long brown hair, blue eyes, a face so close to Matilda's own reflection that her mind simply refused, for a full moment, to process it. The paint was cracked at the edges. This was old. She turned it over. A date, 5 years prior. A name she didn't recognize. Her chest tightened the way it does when a question is forming that you already suspect you don't want answered. "Why?" she whispered to the empty library. "Does she look so much like me?" The fire in the grate popped once, offered nothing. Don't go anywhere, because what Matilda discovers hidden behind that portrait will make everything that felt like rescue feel suddenly terribly different. Victor Kane arrived on a Thursday morning, which felt wrong in the particular way that certain men feel wrong when they enter a room. Too loud without making a sound. Too large without being especially tall. He came with 6 armed guards, a sealed letter bearing the High Council's crest, and the expression of someone who has never once been told no and absorbed the lesson. Matilda watched from the east wing window as he crossed the courtyard below. Long wool coat, letter held out before him like a weapon. Which, as it turned out, it was. The letter demanded her return. Used words like lawful obligation and contractual blood tribute, the way certain documents use formal language to make shameful things sound reasonable. Duskbane was already in the throne room when Victor entered. He stood exactly as he always stood, spine straight, hands at his sides, perfectly still. He did not reach for the letter. She had expected negotiation. She had expected Victor to be smooth about it, to use the language of reasonableness the way he always did, wrapping ugly things in clean sentences. He was not smooth. He walked the length of the hall twice before he spoke, and when he did, his voice had lost the careful polish she had heard at the cathedral. What was underneath it was less impressive. "You think this man is better than me," he said. Not to Duskbane, to her. "You think because he hasn't hurt you yet. He won't." Matilda looked at him steadily. "I think," she said, "that a man who has never once in 3 centuries forced anyone to stay is a different kind of man than one who purchased a woman's future to settle a debt he created on purpose." The hall went very still. Victor's jaw tightened. Something moved in his eyes, not quite anger, closer to the look of a man who has just realized the room is no longer arranged in his favor. "We'll see," he said, and left. She should have felt relief. She felt something with edges instead. 3 nights after Victor's visit, she went back to the library, not for a book, for an answer. She worked her way along the lowest shelves, pulling drawers, pressing the backs of panels, following the instinct of someone who has learned that the most important things are usually the ones someone else thought to hide. She found the cedar box behind a false panel, 3rd shelf from the floor. The lock was old iron. The key was hanging on a small nail directly above it, the way her father had always hidden the spare house key under the most obvious rock by the front door and called it hidden. Inside, 37 pages, formal script, High Council letterhead, dated across 3 years. The Whitmore family's debt, every cent of it, purchased in full 3 years ago, before Victor, before any of this. By King Duskbane of Nocturne. She read it twice, then a 3rd time, because the mind sometimes needs 3 passes before it will accept a fact it doesn't want. He had bought her family's debt before she even knew the debt existed. He had positioned that carriage outside the cathedral. He had not stumbled upon her in the fog. He had been waiting. I didn't escape. The thought arrived without drama, the way the most devastating realizations do. Quiet, clear, complete. I was transferred. She found him in the study, standing at the window, back to the door, looking out at the fog over the forest. He knew she was there. She had come to understand that he always knew. He didn't turn around. She set the documents on the desk behind him. I was moved from one man's ledger to another's. Her voice was steady until the last word, where it broke. Just there, just once. "Tell me I'm wrong." He turned. He looked at the papers. He looked at her face. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He walked to the fireplace instead, Slowly. The walk of a man approaching something he has been putting off. And he picked up the documents. All 37 pages. He dropped them into the fire. She watched ink curl black, signatures dissolve. 3 years of careful record-keeping become ash, and then nothing. He dropped to one knee on the library floor, the Vampire King. On one knee, his expression stripped of every layer of composure she had ever seen him wear. And underneath it, something she had not expected. Not coldness, not calculation, fear, she realized. Standing there with ash still drifting from the fireplace grate, that she had never once considered what it cost him to maintain that composure. 300 years of it. 300 years of standing very still while the world decided what he was and what he was worth. She knew something about that. Not 300 years worth, but enough. "You are completely free," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. "Every document is gone. Every claim. There is nothing left on paper that connects you to this house, unless you choose to be here." Matilda didn't move. "I kept those papers because I was afraid," he continued. "I told myself it was for your protection, that I needed legal standing to keep Victor away. That was true. But the deeper truth is that I was afraid if you knew how this began, you would leave, and I could not." He stopped, jaw tight, started again. "I did not want that." 300 years old. He had survived things she couldn't imagine. And he was kneeling on a library floor, afraid of a 22-year-old woman with a torn dress and a grandmother's handkerchief in her pocket. She reached out. She touched the silver scars on his cheek. 3 long marks, each a memory of Victor's blade. And she felt him go absolutely still beneath her hand. The way someone goes still when they haven't been touched gently in a very long time, and aren't sure what to do with it. Something in her chest did something quiet and permanent. Real strength, she thought, isn't in bloodlines or contracts. It's in the choice to tell the truth when you're terrified of what it costs you. She opened her mouth to speak. A black raven crashed through the window. Glass scattered across the floor. The bird dropped a sealed letter between them and disappeared back into the dark before either of them moved. Duskbane snatched it up, broke the seal, read it in 1 second. She knew because his face changed in 1 second. Everything that had just been open in his expression closed off completely. His jaw set. He held the letter out to her. Victor's handwriting. Unhurried, certain of itself. The masquerade ball. The eternal palace. Saturday. Bring her, or I bring the full council. And beneath that, one final line. The masquerade ball is where she dies. Keep watching, because what Victor has planned for that ballroom is far more dangerous than Matilda realizes, and the power she carries in her own blood is about to change the entire night. The Eternal Palace was built to make ordinary people feel small. Matilda had sat in the back row of 100 events where the room itself was designed for someone else. She knew what it felt like to stand in a space that was quietly, architecturally certain you didn't belong. The grand masquerade ball communicated that in chandeliers, in marble so polished it reflected the candlelight from 6 directions at once, in the way 600 silver masks caught the glow and sent the room shimmering like something alive. She wore a deep blue gown, Seraphina's doing, and a mask with 3 small moonstones above the left eye. Duskbane was at her side, in black, unmasked. He did not own a mask, she had come to suspect, because he had never in 3 centuries required the particular social mercy of one. "Stay close," he said as they entered. She did, for a while. Victor found them within 20 minutes. He wore a wolf mask, gold, with a long jaw, and moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who has already decided how the evening ends. He stopped at the center of the ballroom floor. The orchestra played 2 more bars, then let the music drift into silence, the way music does when a room senses something more important is happening. "Friends," Victor said. His voice was built for carrying. "I come before you tonight with a grievous truth." He looked directly at Duskbane. "This man, your king, acquired a young woman through her family's financial obligation, not to protect her, to claim her. The woman standing beside him in blue silk is not a duchess by choice. She is a transaction dressed in court clothing." The murmurs started at the edges of the room and moved inward. The way cold moves through a house in November, Matilda felt every set of eyes in the room settle on her. She kept her chin level, kept her breathing even. "Don't react." She thought toward Duskbane. That is exactly what he wants. She felt Duskbane's hand close at his side, not reaching for her, not moving at all, just closing into a slow fist and then releasing. Controlled, deliberately controlled. He understood. She never found out what he would have said in response, because that was the moment the arrow came. Silver-tipped. Fast. No warning sound until it struck. Duskbane moved in a single motion. No hesitation. No calculation. Stepping directly in front of her, she didn't see the arrow. She felt him stagger, heard the sharp exhale of a man absorbing something that costs him significantly. He went to one knee. The ballroom shattered into noise, screaming. The rush of 600 people moving toward doors at once, masks dropping to the marble floor. Victor was shouting something she couldn't hear. Duskbane's hand found her arm. "This silver is spreading," he said. His voice was wrong, thick, strained, each word measured against pain. His eyes were darkening at the edges, the red deepening in a way she had not seen before. Not the brief flicker of managed thirst, something more serious. "You need to move, now." "I'm not leaving you, Matilda." His grip on her arm tightened. Then, deliberately, released. "Go." She went. Not toward the doors, toward the servants' corridor she had noticed when they arrived. Low-ceilinged, smelling of tallow and cold stone. She ran until the ballroom noise faded to a muffled roar, until there was only her footsteps and her breathing and the slap of her shoes on flagstone. She turned a corner. 2 of Victor's men, waiting, as though they had known exactly which corridor she would choose. She fought, elbowed, twisted, pulled free, and ran again. Through a heavy door, up a staircase that wound tighter and tighter until it ended at a single door that opened onto outside. Wind. Rain coming sideways. She was on a ledge, 4 stories up. The stone balustrade was slick as river rock beneath her hands, and the fog below was so dense she couldn't see the ground. Behind her, the door banged open. She pressed her back to the wall, looked down at nothing but white fog, looked at her hands. Her grandmother's handkerchief was still in her bodice. 60 years old, embroidered by a woman who had carried it through her own frightening mourning and come out the other side. A woman who had rolled sugar cookie dough in a chipped red bowl and raised daughters who were, apparently, the kind of people who glowed blue on rain-soaked ledges 4 stories above the ground. Matilda almost laughed. The almost laugh steadied her more than any amount of deep breathing would have. "I am not that girl anymore," she thought, the one on the cathedral steps. shaking in soaked lace, with no plan and no choice. I have not been her for weeks. She said it aloud, to the rain, because some truths need to be heard before they can be believed. I am Matilda Whitmore, and I choose to live. The warmth began at the center of her chest. She felt it before she saw it, moving outward through her arms, into her palms, into the tips of her fingers. A soft blue glow appeared at her wrists, tracing the lines of her veins the way dawnlight traces the edge of curtains. Quiet, steady. Hers. Moonblood. She had read about it in the Citadel's oldest history volumes. A gift present in one human bloodline each century, the ability to carry light through darkness, to heal what silver destroys, to illuminate what fear conceals. She had closed that book thinking it was old mythology. She looked at her glowing hands. 15 feet of wet wall stood between her and the balcony below. She gripped the stone. She climbed. She did not fall. Duskbane found her on the balcony 4 minutes later. He pulled her into his arms without a word, his grip too tight. The grip of someone who has been badly frightened and has no graceful way to say so. She felt him shaking, not from cold. He didn't feel cold the way she did. She pulled back to look at him. The silver had spread up his neck in dark lines beneath the skin, branching like frost across a window. His eyes were nearly fully red now, the deep, dangerous shade she had seen that first night in the carriage, multiplied. His jaw was rigid. He was angling his face deliberately away from her throat. He was losing the fight against the poison. She could see it. She didn't deliberate. She reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He kept a small silver blade there. Old habit. A private joke about a vampire who carried silver. And she drew it lightly across her own wrist. "Drink," she said, pressing it to his lips. "You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. Let me give something back." He resisted. 1 second. 2. A sound came from him. Not a word. Something lower. The sound of a man fighting himself very hard. Then his hands closed around her arm. His eyes closed. And he drank. The blue light moved through her into him. She felt it leaving her, felt it traveling, felt it finding the dark lines of silver in his blood and quietly, methodically, dissolving them. She watched the frost patterns on his neck fade, one by one. His eyes opened, red, then gold, clear, steady, gold. He breathed, a real breath, the breath of someone surfacing after too long underwater. "You saved me," he said, barely above a whisper. "We're even," she said. He almost smiled. Then every trace of it left his face. From somewhere below in the palace, Victor's laughter rose through the chaos, unhinged, climbing. The laughter of a man who has stopped performing composure entirely. Her light is a weapon she doesn't understand yet. Moonblood given in fear becomes destruction. And your king has just bound himself to the one thing in this world that could end you all. The gold in Duskbane's eyes steadied. "He's wrong," he said quietly. Matilda looked at her hands. The glow had softened to almost nothing now. Warm. Calm. "How do you know?" she asked. "Because you weren't afraid when you offered it," he said. "You were certain." She looked at him. He looked at her. Below them, Victor's laughter was already beginning to sound like something else, something hollow. "Stay with us, because what happens when Victor's accusation reaches the High Council will decide not just Matilda's future, but the fate of every person who was ever bought and sold in Nocturne's long history. The storm had passed by the time they returned to Duskbane Citadel, but the quiet that followed was not the peaceful kind. It was the quiet of a house after something has shifted, the way a room feels different after a hard conversation, even when nothing in it has moved. Victor's public accusation had spread through Nocturne's nobility the way certain stories spread. Fast, selectively, and always slightly changed in the retelling. By morning, half the realm had heard a version of it. Most versions were wrong in the details. All of them agreed on one thing. The Moonblood girl existed, and her power was real. What was actually true? What Matilda assembled from the Citadel's oldest records. Sitting cross-legged on the study floor at 2 a.m. with a pot of tea going cold beside her, was this. Moonblood was not a weapon. It had never been designed as one. It was a healing gift, dormant in one human bloodline per century, capable of dissolving silver corruption, capable of bonding with a vampire and restoring what darkness had taken from him. Victor had believed that if he cornered her on that ledge, if he made her desperate enough, frightened enough, the Moonblood would activate in self-defense and become something destructive. He had needed her terrified. She had been decided instead. And that difference, it turned out, was everything. The High Council convened a formal hearing 4 days later. Duskbane testified. His account was precise and did not flatter him. He acknowledged the debt purchase, acknowledged the carriage, acknowledged that he had arranged to intercept her. He did not minimize it. Serafina testified after him, presenting documents that predated Victor's claims by decades. A 40-year record of every person Victor Kane had acquired through financial obligation, and what had become of each of them. She delivered it with the calm thoroughness of a woman who has been keeping careful records for a very long time, waiting for exactly this room. Then Matilda spoke. The chamber was full of ancient vampires who watched her the way people watch something unfamiliar, with a suspicion dressed up as interest. She had sat in rooms like this before, in a different way. Rooms where she was the subject of the conversation rather than a voice in it. She spoke clearly. She did not apologize for surviving. Victor's crimes were entered into the record one by one. The families whose debts he had purchased, the marriages he had arranged against the will of the people in them. The young vampire woman from 5 years ago, the one in the portrait, the one who shared Matilda's face, who had not survived the year after Victor claimed her. 2 council members whose financial ties to Victor were documented in Serafina's records resigned before the afternoon session ended. When the verdict was read, the room was very quiet. Victor Kane lost his title, his estate, and his seat on the council. He was escorted from the chamber by 6 guards, the same number he had brought to Duskbane's gate not 3 weeks ago, which felt like a kind of symmetry. The debt tribute system did not collapse overnight. Systems built over centuries rarely do. But 3 senior council members introduced reform legislation before the month was out, and the cracks that had opened in that hearing room were real. Cracks, given enough time, become doors. That evening, Serafina sat beside Matilda on the stone bench in the moonlit garden, near the jasmine hedge that had started to bloom in the last week. She folded her hands in her lap and said the thing she had apparently been saving for exactly this moment. I was brought to this house against my will, 31 years ago. My lord freed me within the month and offered me a position. I have stayed every year since by my own choosing. She looked at Matilda with the directness of a woman who does not traffic in comfort at the expense of truth. No one who has ever lived under this roof has been kept here by anything other than their own decision. I want you to know that. Not because it changes the past, but because you deserve to know what is true about where you are standing." She said it simply, then smoothed her skirt and went inside. Because she was not a woman who made speeches linger past their natural end. The ring was simpler than she expected. No enormous stone, no elaborate setting, just a clean band of dark silver, with the house Duskbane crest engraved on the face, a crescent moon above an open hand. She turned it in the moonlight. "The open hand," she said. "It has been the crest for 200 years, he said. "My predecessor chose the closed fist. I changed it the year I took the throne." She looked at him. "No one ever asked me why," he said, with the faint, dry tone she had come to recognize as his version of wry humor. They assumed it was aesthetic. "Why then?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because the closed fist keeps nothing. It only drives things away." She turned the ring once more, slid it onto her finger. "I choose you," she said. "Not because of any debt, not because of fear, because I want to." She kissed him in the moonlight coming through the tall window. Then she said, "1 year." He tilted his head. "Before I choose immortality, I want 1 year to decide with a clear head, to make sure this is freedom and not just a more comfortable version of the same cage." She had expected negotiation. She had expected him to flinch. He said, "Then I will wait." 4 words. No conditions. No visible effort. Somehow that promise felt like more than an eternity would have. The year passed the way good years do. Not quickly, and not slowly, but with the particular fullness of time that is actually being lived in. Duskbane trained her to work with the moonblood, not in formal sessions with a syllabus, over months, in the East Courtyard, starting with the smallest exercises, learning to let the light move through her without rushing it, the way you learn to carry a full cup across a room without looking at it too hard. There were days the glow came before she intended, and days it went quiet when she needed it most. He said that was to be expected. "It follows your confidence," he told her one afternoon, "not your fear." "So I just need to stop being afraid," she said. "No," he said. "You need to act anyway. The confidence follows the action, not the other way around." She thought about that for a long time. It turned out to apply to more than moonblood. She wrote letters to her mother, careful ones at first, then longer, then more honest than she had known how to be before. Honest about the fear she'd carried into that carriage, about the anger she'd felt reading those documents in the library, about the way forgiveness was turning out to be less a single decision and more a daily one, like making the bed or watering a plant. Her mother wrote back. The letters were hard to read. She read them anyway. She kept them in the carved wooden box on her desk that Serafina had quietly placed there one morning without comment. She began walking Nocturne City, its night markets and narrow alleys, and the great public library, which was open to human scholars twice a week and had, she noticed, precisely 0 regular visitors before she started coming. The librarian was a thin vampire with spectacles he didn't technically need and a genuine passion for footnotes that bordered on the devotional. They understood each other immediately. He had been cataloging the same collection, alone, for 60 years. She was the first person in 4 decades to ask him what his favorite volume was. He blinked at her for a long moment. The way people blink when they have forgotten that questions like that can be asked of them. "No one has ever," he started. "I have time," she said. "Tell me." He told her for 45 minutes. She took notes. It occurred to her, Walking home through the night market with ink on her fingers and the smell of roasting chestnuts in the cold air, that this was what reclaiming a life actually looked like from the inside. Not a single dramatic moment on a rain-soaked ledge. Mostly it looked like asking someone a question they'd stopped expecting to be asked. Mostly it looked like having time and choosing to spend it on something that mattered to someone else. She studied the history of debt tribute laws across 5 centuries. She took notes in 3 different notebooks. She drafted a petition to the High Council calling for the abolishment of all remaining debt tribute statutes and the creation of a council-overseen relief fund for human families still carrying obligations. She rewrote it 4 times before she was satisfied. She told Duskbane about it over dinner the evening she submitted it. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you want me to add my name too?" "No," she said. "I wanted it to stand on its own." "Good," he said, and went back to his book. She had not expected that to be the response. She found she loved him most in moments like this one, when he understood, without being told, exactly what kind of support she was and was not asking for. 6 months later, the council passed a preliminary reform act, not everything she had asked for. Enough to begin. Serafina brought her the news in the garden, holding the official letter with both hands and a composure that did not quite conceal what was underneath it. 31 years, she said quietly. I have waited 31 years to see this language in an official document. Matilda took the letter, read it through, folded it carefully, and placed it in the inside pocket of her coat, next to her heart, next to where the handkerchief always was. On the last night of the year, the anniversary of a rainy evening outside a cathedral, which made it the strangest anniversary in recent history, Matilda stood on the citadel balcony, with the air warm for once and the moon sitting low and enormous over the tree line. She had the handkerchief in her hand, not tucked away, actually in her hand, smoothed flat against her palm. The forget-me-nots faded now to a softer blue than they had been a year ago. She had washed it twice and pressed it between the pages of the Nocturne history volume where she had first read about moonblood, which felt, she thought, like exactly the right place for it. She thought about the girl she had been on those cathedral steps, soaking wet, terrified, throwing herself into an unknown dark with nothing but a piece of embroidered cloth pressed against her chest and the dim. Stubborn conviction that whatever waited in that carriage could not possibly be worse than what waited at the altar. She felt for that girl a great, uncomplicated tenderness. She had been so brave. She hadn't known she was brave. She had just been desperate, which is sometimes the same thing, and sometimes braver. Duskbane stepped out behind her. He wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin against her hair. And they stood there, looking at the forest, where the fog was finally beginning to thin. "Have you decided?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Same answer as last year." She felt something shift in him, a slow release, like a door that's been held shut a long time, finally allowed to rest. "Matilda," he said. "Duskbane," she said. "I love you." Simply, directly, as though he had been working up to saying it that plainly for approximately 300 years and had finally run out of reasons to wait. "I know," she said. "I love you too." She kissed him, slow, certain, unafraid. Below in the courtyard, a single night-blooming flower opened, white, faintly luminous, the way certain things bloom when they have finally, after a long time, found the right conditions. Word spread through Nocturne quietly, the way true things spread. The Vampire King has a duchess. And Matilda Whitmore, once a name on a debt ledger, once a girl in a soaked wedding dress with nowhere to go but forward, had built something real inside those black stone walls. A petition that was already changing law. A library that now had, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 regular visitors and 1 deeply enthusiastic librarian. A home where the night-blooming jasmine had learned to trust the dark, and the fog over the forest lifted a little more each morning. She was not running anymore. She was building. This story teaches us 3 quiet things. First, your voice still counts. Even now, even after the children moved away and the house got too big and too silent. Matilda didn't reclaim her life all at once. She wrote one honest letter, then another. If there is someone you have gone too long without telling the truth to, a daughter in Denver, a sister you stopped calling, write 1 paragraph this week, just 1. Put it in an envelope before you change your mind. Second, what you carry for others matters more than you know. Matilda's grandmother never met Duskbane. She just embroidered forget-me-nots on a handkerchief 60 years before it was needed. The small, careful things you do for the people you love, the recipes written out by hand, the quilt folded at the foot of the guest bed, those things travel further than you will ever see. Third, choosing yourself is not selfish. It is the whole point. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or of a younger version of yourself, tell us in the comments. What does courage look like in your life right now? We read every single one. This vampire tale was born from a real human soul, full of emotion, contradiction, and longing. I was merely a companion who helped arrange the words to be as beautiful and clear as possible. That's why you'll find it not only terrifying, but also very human.